I found that I could not be the same person and make the same choices that I made before I entered into really taking this concept of a reckoning seriously. If you're doing your own reckoning, part of that has to be looking at the times in which you find yourself being played, being put in a position of being pitted against another BIPOC person or community or organization because the white power structure wants you to do that, wants you to fight each other rather than to fight them.
How committed are you to your values and ideals? Are you willing to put your money where your mouth is? That's a very common phrase. Well, my guest, Dr. Ben Danielson, did just that when he made a choice that the organization he was employed by no longer aligned with his values and ideals, and he left and shared his views on that organization quite publicly. We leave no stone unturned exploring institutionalized racism, our own inner reckoning, and personal power. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of Feel Good, the podcast. I'm your host, Malika Lee, and with me today to talk about courage, the courage to quit, is Dr. Ben Danielson. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Oh my goodness, you have no idea. So am I. Okay, before we jump in, for those listeners who are not familiar with Dr. Danielson already, let me just give you a little bit of context. Dr. Ben Danielson is a well-respected medical physician who received his medical degree from the University of Washington Medicine in 1992. He completed his residency at Seattle Children's Hospital before assuming the leadership post at Odessa Brown Children's Clinic in 1999, where he ended up resigning in November 2020, citing institutional racism. So we are going to get into it today. Okay, are you ready? Let's do it.
Let's do this. Let's go. Yes.
Is it okay if I call you Ben?
Please call me Ben. I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
May I call you Malika as well?
Absolutely. So from the outside looking in, what I'm calling, what you did was courage. But is that the value and is that the way that you see it?
That is a very fraught, difficult term for me, the word courage. It's a little bit related to the way I feel about the word resilience, because too often I feel like Black and brown folks are somehow expected to endure things that are difficult, that the expectation of suffering is somehow some piece of language when we talk about someone being super resilient or when we talk about someone exhibiting courage. This sounds backwards, but sometimes it feels like that almost lets the offending institution, organization, or power structure off the hook a little bit. So I guess I have that mixed feeling about that in general. The second thing is just I have to recognize my privilege in all of this, and I'm not going to sugarcoat and lie. I worked very hard to become a physician, and I did that partly to get up and out of the poverty that I grew up in. But I also know that being in this position now in my life gives me privileges that I didn't have as a young person, and part of that privilege is the ability to call something out and make a statement when you need to.
Right. And for it to be received and believed and respected.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I really hear you on that. So if you wouldn't call it courage, I guess from your purview, what would you call it?
I've called it a piece of reckoning, of my own personal reckoning as well, which involves personal reflection, really looking at the things that for 20 plus years have been part of the environment of work and world around me that I don't know that I could have done more to have decried or spoken out about. The parts and the ways that any of us that work in organizations are complicit.
Mhm.
The ways in which hierarchy and privilege and all those things play into those things, um, and the responsibility to be stepping into a different moment differently. And I found that I could not be the same person and make the same choices that I made before I entered into really taking this concept of a reckoning seriously.
Mm. That's really deep. I get that. So it's kind of like on the hero's journey, right? So what was it, an internal reckoning or was it an external reckoning, or kind of did the two converge? Like what happened within you and outside of you that led to this reckoning?
It was a combination, I think, of internal and external. And I hope that anybody who is talking about a reckoning is doing some combination of really looking at themselves on the inside and also looking at how that relates to the spaces, places, and people around them. It has to be both internal and external, but you can't stand up and say you believe in things without first looking very carefully at yourself in the mirror. And I think that's important. I want to be clear. I've been speaking out against racism, about issues of inequities, and um, those kinds of topics for 20 years. Also, most of my talks have been about issues of inequity and racism. So this is not entering a new topic for me, but it is looking at it through a deeper and stronger scrutiny. And I think that is what we need to be doing as individuals and as a country. And I don't think anyone gets a pass on doing some deep reflection and committing to something that means you're going to have to make some sacrifices.
And see, that's where, I would say for me, and I totally get what you're saying about courage and, with black and brown people and how that can be same thing with strength, right? Like that,
Right.
that has the same energy to it, to your point. But on the flip side of that, like if I think of Colin Kaepernick, if I think of like, the idea of speaking out against an institution can bring up the fears around survival,
Yes.
right? Like, and that's where I think the courage comes in, because when we look at, let's say, Colin Kaepernick, who there was financial repercussions for his choice, and the same with you, which can bring up like our livelihood and primal survival needs and feelings. And I'm wondering if that came up for you in this process and experience of reckoning.
Interesting to ask it that way, because I think you put me back in touch with some feelings, and a lot of them were anger, and still
Mm,
are outrage and anger that an institution and specific people within it felt so immune to scrutiny, to changing, to reckoning, to taking account for what they've been doing,
mhm.
that the assumption would be that I would never risk the job that I loved, and it was the best job I'll ever have, in order to really stand up for something. There's an assumption that we are too bought in, that we're too connected, that we've made some kinds of deals in order to do the work that we find meaningful, that we have to somehow give up some other components of our values. And that just made me angry,
Mhm.
angry that people could assume that they had that over on you. So that was a piece of it. I think also maybe the Taurus kind of stubbornness in me, but
Happy birthday. This is Taurus season right
that's right. That's right. But I also, I will continue to believe in myself, and the idea that I can find a way to do meaningful work. I can find a space for myself. I can find a job. I can find a job. I believe in that, and I will not let anyone take that belief away from me. I will not let someone's ill spirit, ill doings, questionable morality, racism, or anything else define how I live my life. That was kind of the angry stubbornness that came out of that and a feeling of obligation. Like I said, I've been talking about these issues for a long time, and I really wondered if I was actually making a meaningful sacrifice in the name of the stuff that I said I believed in.
Mm. Yes. And, we talked about this before we started recording, that I'm very familiar. I actually used to work for Seattle Children's Hospital. And I shared with you my view that you were one of the few people in that organization that could have had the impact upon leaving and speaking out that you did because of your credibility. And respect both within the organization and outside, because of your position of power within the organization and outside. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if there's too many other people that could have left and sent the kind of shock waves that you did.
Oh, that feels complicated and difficult too, because I think it's shameful that someone else could be forced out of an institution. And I know people for whom that's happened. I think it's shameful that someone else could leave out of frustration and anger and outrage. And I know people that have done that. And yet the way our society is stacked with its many different biases, including like the hierarchy of a doctor versus something else, it's shameful that we would come to that conclusion that, I would have, my leaving would be more or less meaningful than someone else's leaving, because many people have left that particular institution. Many people who have been harmed because of their gender and the color of their skin and their identities, and there are many intersectional identities. Many people have been harmed, and yet for you to say that, it's beyond bittersweet. It's painful to hear it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's right down to the practicalities. So I don't know if this is an appropriate transition to say, but
Say it.
in order to keep my voice, in order to be able to name the things that were going on, at least my interpretations of them and what I saw, I had to forego any kind of severance or anything like that, because what organizations like this hospital do is they make you sign non-disclosure agreements when you leave, and they work very hard to silence you. And often they dangle some small kind of severance in front. And I've watched that happen to other folks who've left the organization. That severance has been the gag that has kept them unable to speak about the things that are important. And again, it comes with privilege to be able to say, I'm going to leave this job with no severance and no prospects, because it's important to be able to speak out about the things that you have to talk about.
I no longer work at that organization, and I left on great terms. But I have signed one from a previous organization, so I know exactly what you're talking about, and went through that experience. So I want to take a step back, because you mentioned your reckoning when you got to a place where there's some external things going on and internal. And I want to go to that part because I know that you're married. So I want to, because it's not just about your choice, right? Your choice has an impact on your family. Did you seek out a counsel? Like, what did that part, before you made the choice and expressed your decision to leave, what were the inner workings and the support? And you did something that, we're conditioned not to do. You left a job without having another job.
Right. Yeah.
So tell us about that part of it.
Yeah, that's questionable judgment, I know, but
I've done it, full disclosure. So I've done it a couple of times myself, and don't regret it.
Good for you. I chose a profession that was nothing but planning, right? Like, I could basically know exactly where I'd be and what I'd be doing ever since I was probably a sophomore in college. In some ways, the path is so clearly described, and I think there was nothing but job security and certainty that marked my journey. Again, partly out of that thing that I think a lot of us who've grown up extremely impoverished kind of feel, that like we just have to do everything possible to gain financial security and to sustain it. So you're tapping into something very true. It went against every one of my trained and earned and learned kinds of instincts to make a move like that. And I do have to just credit that I was fortunate enough to marry someone much more intelligent and thoughtful and bright and
Yeah.
brilliant and wonderful than me. And she was also one of the most caring people I know, and she was willing to go on this ride and take this on. You know, I did my best to say, I will work hard to make sure that we are not spiraling into deep financial insecurity, but this feels important. And she was supportive and continues to be every step of that way. But you're right, we don't do these things alone. And that's partly why it's important that they're done in a certain way. If you leave an organization quietly or you let them describe why you left, the harm that that could be doing to other folks who aren't able to make that choice could be that much worse, right?
Mhm. So it sounds like when you left, because you mentioned about not signing the NDA and the non-disclosure, that you had a sense that you were going to speak out at some point. Is that accurate?
Honestly, when I was first really hitting the point where I just felt I had to leave, I was hoping at first to make negotiations with hospital leadership to get them agree to make some changes. I had been trying to do that when I was in the job, and then I was trying to do that as part of a departure kind of agreement with them. I had the false sense that they wanted to do changes and were committed enough that they would agree to something out of that. And what I found consistently was a deaf ear to any of those raised concerns, or at least lip service, or some easy words coming out of people's mouths, but not any true commitments. And so, as that got more frustrating to me, and then as the hospital started to use their, I think, voice to try to describe why I was leaving, saying things like it was just some personal choice or that I had some other opportunity coming up or something, that deeply infuriated me. And I
Mm.
had been I had been quiet at first in the hopes that the hospital would be sincere about the kinds of changes that it said it hadn't been intending to do. And once that seemed very false, and once I saw that my own folks that I worked with at the Odessa Brown Clinic were starting to get messages from the hospital that were frank lies,
Mhm.
I couldn't stand that any longer. And so I had to speak out more.
So that explains the gap from the time that you left in November to, I don't think that the first story broke until a couple of months later in Crosscut.
Till mid-December. You know, it was probably a month or something like that. Yeah. And I had been trying to negotiate with the hospital for months before November as well.
Wow. So let's talk about your inner journey throughout all of this. How has this changed you?
Huh. That's a really good question. I still so much in the dynamic process. It's a little bit hard to step away and answer that with any clarity, because
Mhm.
I think still changing a lot. One is deeply grieving, not seeing the families, the patients, the kids that have been part of my professional life for 2 decades at the Odessa Brown Clinic,
Yeah.
and not working next to the wonderful people that work there. That's a really, really painful thing, and it's a hard thing to just sort of set aside and move past. So there's grieving like that going on. I think that I am a lot less patient about words that seem empty or gestures that don't seem to match up with actions. I think I used to keep hoping for little signs that could lead to big signs that could lead to big changes, that somehow working inside a system and getting some little increment here and there meant that there was reason to hope that some bigger change would happen later. And I'm not down for that anymore. I do not believe in incrementalism in any way, shape, or form. I feel incrementalism has been one of the greatest dodges in science, and in healthcare in particular, in
Mhm.
education,
Mhm.
in order to allow people to feel like they can feel good about themselves from making progress that is a number on paper but is meaningless in terms of our society and the lives that we care about. And
Right.
so, yeah, I'm not down with incrementalism anymore. I don't know if I ever was, but my patience for that is much, much more exhausted.
Yeah. Excuse my interruption, but I want to go back to, it was on my heart to say this because of the way in which you left. I really hear what you're saying about the grief and not being able to communicate to those that you worked alongside and served because of
Yeah.
what was happening. And so I just really want to give you an opportunity for any of your comrades who are serving the community with you that you didn't get a chance to say some things to, or those families. Like, I just want to give you the space to just say what's on your heart, to express, if anything, to them that may be listening, because you didn't get a chance to say it outwardly while all of this was going on.
Oh, thank you. That is a really kind gift. And I know that the people who I know well and know me well also know what's in my heart. So the words I say might not be as necessary as they feel for me to say them, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
my challenge is to Seattle Children's Hospital to be better, to do better, and it's partly because I know that it could be a better place. My frustration and outrage is at Seattle Children's Hospital and its leadership for subverting equity and social justice by pretending to do work around those things. My challenge and my beef is with that hospital and not with the clinic, the
Right.
Odessa Brown Children's Clinic, which I think does amazing, wonderful work.
Mm-hmm.
I would want to say to the folks I know and care about that one of the greatest strategies that white power has is to try to get us to fight each other. And I've watched in the months since I've left attempts to get us to be at odds with each other. And when I say us, I mean Black people.
Yeah.
And specifically Black and brown people that work at Seattle Children's. And I would want to make sure folks know I will never publicly diss or disparage the hardworking, wonderful Black and brown folks who work at Children's Hospital and at Odessa Brown Clinic, because I know what they face and I know what they do every day. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to fall for the kind of pitting and splitting that the power structure kind of hopes we will devolve into. Mm-hmm. And I will say this, a critique of our own communities, and I'm sorry if this makes some people mad, but if you're doing your own reckoning, part of that has to be looking at the times in which you find yourself being played, being put in a position of being pitted against another BIPOC person or community or organization because the white power structure wants you to do that, wants you to fight each other rather than to fight them.
Divide and conquer. It's strategy and it's effective.
Yeah, page 1 of the playbook, right? Page 1. It works. And it is so easy to fall into that. And unfortunately, it happens.
It does. So I want to take a step back, because I think you can speak to this, in a way like we've known in the history of this country. And it's difficult to have institutions, right, which are of regular people that come together, that bring in their full selves, which include racism, sexism, bias, all these things that they're bringing into the workplace, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, from your perspective of working within that system, and also given the historical experiences that Black and brown and BIPOC people have had of this medical institution that may not always be looking, and I'm putting this very politically correct, out for our interest or even have us in mind, how do we navigate? Because we still need care. How do we navigate a system and advocate for ourselves within a system that is not, always supportive and thinking of us, from your perspective?
It's so funny, Malika, you're a good interviewer, because every question you ask me, I want to ask you as well, because I bet, and I'll bet anybody listening to this podcast would have their own perspectives and answers on these important questions. These are the things that come to be part of, this sounds corny, but part of doing this reckoning is asking those questions. And they're not like surprise questions, right? Mm-hmm. Working at Seattle Children's, I know, not just for Black folk, but for other folk who've been marginalized. I've watched over and over again over the decades, moms bringing their kids in, knowing that they might not be treated with respect or dignity in that hospital.
Yeah.
They might be judged for the clothes that they wear. They might be judged because they're a single mom working and they can't be at the bedside every minute. They might be judged for the depth of emotion that comes out in their voices. And that we know that happens. We know that hospitals like Seattle Children's police Black and brown people in ways that are unjust, inexcusable, and straight up racist. So I've watched and known that so many moms have come to Seattle Children's because the technical care there is care that they might not find anywhere else. But what they have to brave, what they have to suit up for, what they have to put armor on for every day is knowing that their dignity might be eroded even as they're trying to get critical, important care for their child with sickle cell disease or with cancer or with chronic illnesses of other forms. I've seen families travel over the mountains, Spanish-speaking families. I've seen families from rural communities that just have lived lives that are just so different than the spaces and places that a hospital and an institution in a city can have. I've seen the treatment and the judgment be a painful thing. So your question is nothing new, right? And it's nothing new even for medicine compared to other spaces. As a Black person, one of the skills that we've been taught by our elders from the earliest is how to walk out of our door and be ready to face a world that does not respect us, does not care about our dignity, does not see us as humans in the same way. So that is the skill that we're supposed to put on every single day, which is again why I have trouble with the word courage. I have trouble with the word resilience, because it is almost this expectation that you're supposed to be able to walk out that door every day and face that every single day. And maybe we should just start pushing back on that more often and in more demonstrative ways.
Yeah. Even going to the workplace, like you said, I mean, it happens in spaces, the grocery store, like you just never know sometimes. How do we navigate that part, especially when it comes to care? Like I would say my thing is I listen to my gut. So if I don't sense that a person who's providing me care connects to and recognizes my humanity, then I don't go back to them. That's my own personal baseline. Like if I don't feel like there's just a human connection and recognition, and I think that's even a cultural thing, then it's like, I'm not going back. So that's one of my rules of thumb. What about for you though? Like what do you say?
See, this is why I'm so glad you're responding to this question too, because I think that's what you said is really, really important. And I couldn't have said it with such grace. I perceive that folks who experience lots of white privilege don't even know anything other than being automatically centered and lifted up by every environment that they're in. So they don't even have a concept of what it's like not to experience that. And even worse, what it's like to actually have to armor yourself against the denigration all the time. And I love what you said. And again, there are moms who they don't have a choice. The person who knows sickle cell disease is standing within the walls of that institution. And so they're going to brave the walls of that institution because they love their child. They know that on some physical sense, their child is going to get something they need in that space. And the opportunity to say, I'm just not going to do that, I'm not going to go there, that becomes a whole different thing when you know that your child is relying on some element of care within an institution like that, which is why a children's hospital that serves a whole region, serves like many states and many cultures, indigenous, Alaska Native, Spanish speaking, recent and not recent immigrant families, a hospital that is of high tech and high specialty service to such a broad region has a deeper responsibility, perhaps than many other health institutions, to work harder, to provide equity, to work harder to create an environment that is respectful and promotes dignity, to work harder to listen better, to work harder to make sure that its policies, its culture, and its leadership do not promulgate racism in the daily execution of their functions. It's a greater responsibility. Let's just think about this. This is a hospital that has that kind of service, and then is a nonprofit, does not pay taxes, is able to avert having to pay taxes that would probably be benefiting the very communities that I'm talking about right now. Mm-hmm. And in the avoidance of those taxes, again, there's a deeper responsibility to make sure that the care that you're providing is at least more culturally relevant, has a stronger emphasis on creating the space that you just described, Malika, where somebody sees you, appreciates you, respects you, and cares about your well-being as a person. That's just, I'm sorry, but I expect that of an institution with the kind of responsibilities that Seattle Children's has. I expect that of our education systems too. I expect that of many different spaces, but I'm naming the one that my reckoning is very directly related to. Yes. When I say that.
Yes, and I really hear you, but this is the rub, as you know, Ben.
Yes.
Unfortunately, so, like you said, of even our education system, and I laughed, and I'm a proud product of public schools and all of that. But the challenge is that that's not the case. And sometimes even with the sense of like people's blind spots. So when you're saying about this whole notion of like white supremacy and how just like I found when I traveled abroad, the same way that we experience white privilege in this country is how we experience American privilege when we travel outside of this country.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, they know way more about America than we know about them. In this country, we know way more about white people than they know about other groups. You know what I mean? Like, there's this rub. But I would say that a lot of Americans may not be aware of our privilege outside of the country. I only have a special lens to it, which is a whole different reason and story, partly because I am experiencing not being of privilege in this country on some levels, right? Like, I do have education and other things. But my question is like, I feel like in the Northwest specifically, we're talking about Seattle, people believe that they're liberal. You know what I mean? Like, how do we get the reckoning when some people don't even recognize or realize that there's privilege in the first place, where they think there is equity already? Like, how do we get to that place in the conversation, especially when I feel like in Seattle there, and we've maybe made some progress, but I feel like there's kind of a glaze over the eyes versus the South. The South already has a reputation, right, of bias, of racism. The Northwest is a bit more sophisticated, may not be as overtly violent. And so I think people think we're more progressive than other parts of the country. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And, I grew up on the East Coast, so it was easy to recognize the strange paradox that is the Pacific Northwest, with people who mostly want to feel like they're good people. And I don't know, if you grow up in a city on the East Coast, there's a lot of people who don't care whether you like them or not. But
I'm a Seattle native.
All right.
Yes, so, I know what you mean.
Yeah, there's a lot of wanting to be seen as good people, which is a very short branch off the tree trunk of white comfort, of comfort, of like, I don't want to be feeling uncomfortable by knowing that I have contributed to racism, that my actual life embodies racism, and not just something from the past, not something from an experiment that happened decades ago, but today, right now, that I'm part of an institution that is racist, and it is partly racist because I am part of that institution. That kind of truth is really hard for Northwesterners to face up to, which makes addressing issues, which makes reckoning all the more important from my point of view. But it makes the action steps that should come out of that even harder still. And the amazing, beloved Black communities and brown communities and other BIPOC communities in Seattle, in this area, have an incredible power to hold the mirror up to the faces of folks who want to shy away from understanding how their white privilege is contributing to a racist society. There is an ability for that to happen if we choose to, because it should not be our job to always do that work. But there is an ability within these amazing communities to show that and to continue to show that. And there's work to do on the part of white communities and allies and folks with intersectional identities to help with that work as well. If we really care about creating a society that is anti-racist, that is on a journey towards anti-racism at the very least, because I don't even know if anybody knows what it looks like to truly be anti-racist.
And anti-sexist. I don't know if we could ever have anti-racist without anti-sexist and all the other,
so
isms,
agreed.
because they're so integral and
So true.
Yeah.
You're so true. So we can't talk about our aspirations around that unless we are really willing to get into the hardest conversations and then the hard work of confronting that. And right now, there are spaces in many places where that just makes some people who enjoy privilege so uncomfortable that they will try to take some tiny steps. They will try to do something incremental, like I mentioned before. They'll try to do something that's called equity work or DEI work or whatever. But it will mostly be a dodge in order to allow them to get back to comfort as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And for those listeners that aren't familiar with DEI, it's just an acronym for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think you're right. So then where do we go from here? So let's say there's somebody who's listening who is well-intentioned, right? They really want to be, like you said, they want to be liked, they want to be considered a good guy, right? So what, and let's say we'll span the spectrum, but from your perspective, from let's say a well-intentioned, well-meaning white person, an ally who's willing to do the work, what is your recommendation for them? Where do they even start?
I'm taking a pause and breathing because these are some of the questions sometimes I get in different circles. And there's a piece of me that reacts to this question and just really wants to say, come on, you don't know what the work is? You don't know what we're supposed to be doing? Like, how is that even possible that you don't know what needs to be happening? And it gets back to a very fundamental belief for me that that is maybe more broad than talking about these important issues like gender bias and racial bias and spirituality bias and identity bias and all of these forms of racism and oppression that we live with. And the deeper truth to me, at least in this time, is that in terms of doing the right thing, it is very, very rare for it to be a mystery about what the right thing to do is. What we mostly suffer from is a lack of will in doing the right thing. And we erect all kinds of barriers, all kinds of rationalizations. We have lots of good talking points. We create systems that make it harder. We erect many, many ramparts against doing the right thing. But it is extremely rare to not know what the right thing to do is. So that's why I push back on those questions.
Well, and I really appreciate that perspective because there's a lot of truth in it. And there's an interesting layer, though, because going into, I think, part of white privilege, and this isn't going to be my question, I'm going with somewhere with this. Underneath that is this idea, though, that those people who are white that are in power are the most capable people. To be in those positions and doing the jobs that they do, which is implicit in this idea of white supremacy in the first place. So I think that's why sometimes people have like a blindness to it. Not that it's true, but I just want to give voice to that. But what's connected to that, and I wanted to weave it back to when we were talking about survival, right? When we were talking about, and I've heard you say before that there's this notion that there's a limited amount of power, there's a limited amount of resources, and that often people won't share power because they believe that there's not enough. If that it's shared, that they'll end up worse off. And I think that at the core, that's part of what it is. And I heard you speak to that before. Do you mind just expounding on your sensibilities around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really tightly related to the scarcity mentality. And The scarcity idea of limited resources, zero-sum kind of mathematics is really strongly promulgated. And I think it's mostly promulgated by folks who have historically experienced lots of privilege. And I think it gets even more and more intensely promulgated or put out there when folks who've been in positions of high privilege start to wonder if they're going to start to lose their privilege, because it's a great way to make it very difficult to create lasting and meaningful social change. The idea of scarcity is one of the ways in which you get one community that's been oppressed to fight against another community that's been oppressed over a limited resource of something that probably doesn't actually make that much of a difference in the scheme of things anyway.
Right.
And it relates back to this idea of power in so many ways as well. Both, there's another branch of this about like what we recognize as power. So let's set that one aside for a second, but we should talk about that too. But the idea of people who live in some kind of institutionally named power, their whole egos are wrapped up very tightly into that, of course. Their sense of who they are and their value to society is very deeply wrapped up into that and must make them somehow unique. It must make them some very, very rare resource that is valuable to people around them. But on top of that, the idea that power is something that if you give some of it to someone else, that means that yours is diminished by that same amount and someone else's power is increased by that same amount, is probably beautiful in the world where you pour water from one pitcher into another pitcher and you measure the difference. But that's not the way power works. It's not the way power works, at least not in my belief system. I think power is an emanating, ever-growing force as long as it's shared, as long as it's seeded, as long as it's recognized in other people. And the only way to diminish power is by hoarding it and holding on to it, and by not recognizing it in other people. But it makes you feel like you are more important if you practice the hoarding of power rather than the sharing of power, which is a great tragedy, because I think even as an individual, if you shared power, if you recognized power in other people, if you seeded power and supported power in its many different forms, that will not detract from your own power ever. It will create more power in the universe, especially in the spaces around you, and it will make for a better society and a better world, and you would be a part of that. So the selfishness of power is its own destruction in so many ways. And maybe that's just a riff on that age-old phrase about power corrupts everyone universally. I think people corrupt power as it corrupts them, and they turn it into this precious resource that they must grasp with really tightening finger grips. When in fact, what the world would teach us, what nature would teach us, what beautiful communities teach you is that the more you share power and see power around you, the more it grows. I know as a pediatrician, I see a stronger sense of the potential energy that people carry than the actual energy that they use. We have incredible power as people. It gets me back to the sadness of your statement about me being a doctor made a bigger difference in my departure from the hospital, because it feeds into this idea that some people are powerless in these systems. And I really worry that one of the best ways to make yourself powerless is to tell yourself that you have no power. And so what I mean by that is that,
okay. Yes, please.
Yeah, the more we talk ourselves out of our power, the less work someone who really needs to not be in power has to do. The more
we give our power away, right?
We give it away. Yeah, I've said this many times, and I don't know if it's hard to believe it. I understand that it's hard to believe. I've heard people sometimes say, "Oh, I'm just a student, and I'm just here doing my rotation, I'm learning my profession, and I watch these professional people around me practice racism and gender bias and ableism and transphobia, but I can't say anything because I'm just a student. I have no power." And I want them to know that they have incredible power. They actually have this superpower of not being so folded into the institution and system and organizational structure that they can speak their voices in any ways that they really feel like they want to. They have the power of association because they are in spaces where they observe and see things and then can really report back to other people. They have the power of separation because they can sort of visit spaces like workspaces and then step back into their educational spaces and create and aggregate stronger voices, bring other voices to bear around issues that come up. They have the power of just curiosity, the great strength that makes any student a great learner, to be able to continue to ask questions until somebody realizes that what they're doing is wrong because they can't justify it in the face of your question. There's just so many different ways that we all have power. If you're the front desk person at an organization, you are both the best observer and often, unfortunately, the least observed and regarded person in that group. And you might know and see and aggregate information that no one else would know or see or aggregate. And that's a powerful position to be in. If you're the person that is the lowest paid and lowest respected in some ways in an organizational hierarchy, you still have the power to bring around other people who understand and see and have had similar experiences, and you can aggregate, you can bring people's voices together, and through the many voices, you can make incredible changes. I'm amazed how many times people give away their power. I will share with you, I spoke once with a group of surgeons at the hospital, and there was a lot of dissatisfaction among many of them about the way things were going. And then several of them were saying, yeah, but we just don't have power to make things change. And I'm thinking to myself, you are like the top of the heap in so many different ways from the way most people would think about power. You're surgeons, you're like the most respected people, in terms of your technical abilities. From a hospital standpoint, you're the money makers. You're the ones that there is no general pediatrician like me. All I do is cost the hospital money. I don't make them a dime ever. But a surgeon, they're the ones who are the true rainmakers for a hospital. So their power is incredible. And to hear even them say, well, what can we do? We have no power. What that tells me is that organizational structures are super good at subtly convincing you that no matter where you're stationed, that you don't have power. And once you embrace that and start saying that to yourself, then the game is over.
And it starts young. I mean, I think that goes back to our education system, sometimes the power structures within our own families,
Yes.
age. And so I would say and that's not true for every single person, but there's an indoctrination process. I think that happens for most human beings, right?
Yes.
That conditions us to believe that we don't have power and authority over our experiences. So would you say that's one of your top values, or what would you say right now are your guiding posts in the way you live your life?
I'm going to say the way I hope I live my life, because I think I still exist as a human being who sometimes says things and then will still have to work hard to live into them.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
Me too. Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. That's part of the forever reckoning that I think we need to be committing ourselves to. But one is to never discount your power, to never talk about how you don't have power. I think you should spend more time talking about where your power is and how you can use it in its best way. And if you are working yourself into spaces of power, then how you can share. This whole conversation about equity and about racism is a conversation about power. And if you're not talking straight up about power, which is why I love you asking this question, Malika, then you're not talking about racism. You're not talking about equity. You're not talking about gender bias, because these are power conversations.
And classism, I have to put that out there, because that one gets overlooked, and that's the most insidious one, I think, of the three.
Good point. Yep. Hierarchy, man, and classism is so built around really sustaining its own classism, right?
Right,
That's
exactly.
all it's about. It's just perpetuating its own classism. There's no other purpose in that.
And that's the most dangerous, because what's coming to mind right now, was when Dr. King, which they rarely talk about, right? They rarely talk about this as far as when I was taught history about Dr. King. They'll talk about the civil rights. They rarely talk about Vietnam, which was part of his campaign and plight, or classism.
Yes.
which he started really getting into, towards the end of his life, once he started peeling back all the layers. But I digress, but I just wanted to put
No,
that out there as we're talking about power.
you digress with powerful truths. I love that. That's such a great point. I mean, I've been to the mountaintop. I mean, that was all around a garbage worker strike, right? Like that was,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he was talking about class and hierarchy, and yeah. Anyway, um, the other truth that I'm trying to figure out and trying to live more towards is also one that should force us to do some powerful internal reflection. But there are lots of ways in which we contribute to the preservation of bad systems.
Mm.
And so there are ways in which the job that was, the best job I'll ever have,
Yeah.
the wonder of that opportunity to work with amazing families and work next to amazing staff, that is all true, but it's all also set up to perpetuate a system, a status quo.
Mm.
We're working with often with families who are low income, on Medicaid, and in many ways are being mistreated by society. And we try to fill a few gaps here and there. And in filling those gaps, we may be allowing a mistreating society to continue to be exactly the way it is. We might dim the light on just how bad society is mistreating people. For every person you help, if you're a social worker and you're just helping somebody who's food insecure, housing insecure, it is wonderful to help that person. It is also just a painful internal truth to know that for every group of people that you help, you might make it less likely that the rest of the world sees just how harmful the system is for so many people. And so that truth should not be a paralyzing one. It should be a motivating one. And it should motivate us to be thinking that for anything that we do to help the individuals around us, we must also turn our attention very, very strongly to the systems that create those situations in the first place.
Ooh.
That we must be focusing on those. So much of our efforts and our work and the stuff that we even find rewarding actually makes it a little bit like we're centering the victims, perhaps not blaming victims, but centering them so much that it seems like they are the focus of the problem in some ways. I hate to say it that way because I know I don't believe that, and no one who's working in those spaces believes that. But there's something about putting all of our attention on helping folks who've been badly treated by society that makes it seem like if we keep focusing on the folks badly treated by society, that society will get better. When the truth is that we have to focus on the systems that are badly treating folks, or else we will never run out of a supply of folks that will need our help.
Yeah.
And we have to be working on that level more often. We have to be demanding that solutions go beyond the staving off of suffering. And that will get me to my third point, which is probably making people tired of listening.
You're on a roll, though. You're on a roll, Ben.
We have to start naming something more than the absence of suffering. I would look at things around me and I see, even in the most ardent work to correct issues of racism and gender bias and other forms of oppression. And we are in such an infantile stage in this journey that we don't even have the right words to describe the beautiful place that we want to get to. What I mean by that is all we can do right now, most of the time, is describe the absence of things. When I look at the definition of health equity by the World Health Organization, the WHO, their definition says something like health equity is the absence of discernible differences in outcomes based on groups of people or populations, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
When we talk about like work, we talk about anti-racism, the absence of racism.
I was going to speak to that. I don't like that term. Yeah.
When we talk about addressing issues of gender bias, we're almost always talking about taking away a negative. And all that creates for me is a gray space with no beauty in it.
Yeah.
A space bereft of meaning and all of the wonderful things that we aspire to. So we have to work harder as a society, as people, as children, as elders, as adults, to start describing this place that we want to go to with positive attributes, not with the absence of negative attributes.
Yeah.
And if we don't start doing that, then we're never going to know where to go, and we'll never know if we got there.
Vision. Yeah. Vision. Without vision, the people perish. And to your point, I feel like creating that vision is from a place of power versus the reactionary. Like if I'm,
Right.
understanding what you're saying properly, it's like that reactionary of we don't want this versus saying what it is we want to create and what it is that we do want to experience.
Yeah, that's true hope, right? That's where hope comes. Anyway, that was a very long answer. I'm sorry for that.
Don't apologize. You hit on some major pieces there. So we are at nearly our time. And I just want to ask you, is there anything that I have not asked you that you want to speak to? And just like we have a couple minutes as we wrap up, I know that one of your intentions is to inspire people about the power they have to be important change agents in the world. And you spoke to this earlier, but in that same vein, is there any charge? Is there anything that, has been left unsaid that you'd like to just address in the time that we have left?
I guess a little offshoot of my last point is just that the power of wherever we're trying to get to, just to pull these words together, I'll call it liberation. The power of liberation is so much stronger than any little iota of hate. And I think we see and focus a lot on hatred.
Yeah.
And those folks mean nothing. I mean, they mean nothing. Their acts are heinous and horrible, and they should be punished and held accountable at every level, including leaders in hospitals that don't truly commit to equity and that kind of work. But the reason to hold them accountable and to be so ardent about that is because the place that we want to get to is so much more powerful, so much more incredible than any act of hate that would try to prevent it from occurring. And if we truly understand and believe that, then I think we would be undaunted by the things that make us scared right now, by the things that we worry about right now, and the things that keep us from doing what we know are the right things to do. And so, getting off of that philosophical horse for a moment, I also just want to acknowledge that our society owes many people an incredible debt, and that we have to be very steadfast and firm in saying that it is not enough to say that starting tomorrow, society is going to do something better, that people in power, named power, are going to be better. It is not enough to talk about starting tomorrow, everything's going to be better, because there are wounds that have not been allowed to heal. There are debts that are owed, deep, tangible debts that are owed to parts of our society, especially to Black and Brown communities in this country. And that has to be addressed. We cannot let white privilege off the hook by saying, oh, okay, starting tomorrow, you're going to be good. That is an insufficient thing. All that does is cover over a wound that will continue to fester. And I think that's been one of the biggest challenges this country has faced in its history, is that it seeks so quickly to just erase whatever had happened yesterday, promise to be better tomorrow, and not take a true accounting for the harms that have been done historically up to this moment in time.
I totally agree. And that is part of the reckoning as far as being able to tell the truth. But then on the flip side, like you said about the personal power, as a woman, I call myself Black, African American, my personal power is not waiting for them to do right by me. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
it's so entangled in wanting them to acknowledge the truth. And then we give our power away, kind of like what's coming to mind. I had this experience with a friend of mine. It's like, if somebody has done us wrong interpersonally, and we want them to apologize in a certain way in order for us to be able to forgive them. Why giving my power away to that person? Because they don't know my terms and probably will not fulfill my terms in order for me to lay the burden down to really forgive them. But who's still carrying the burden? I am. Do you know what I
You
mean?
are.
And
That's
so
such a great point. Yeah.
yeah, so it's a delicate balance of yes,
Yes.
we want accountability, but also from my personal power, what's important to me is also having my personal freedom, which is not entangled upon you doing the right thing by me.
I love that. That is such an important thing to say. I hope there's a way to dissect the issue of accountability from needing someone else's approval or anything like that.
Validation,
Yeah,
yeah,
validation. Yeah.
like the gaslighting that goes on
Oh
in our
man.
society.
Yeah. There's a whole like commission of lawyers who are investigating the Seattle Children's Hospital stuff.
Mhm.
And again, in the potentially in a form of performance art, it's Black lawyers trying to arbit all of this and look through it. And I have to say that I'm not waiting on their validation of whether or not my experiences,
Mm.
my personal experiences of racism and the experiences that I watched families, much more important than me, families experience of racism at Seattle Children's. I don't need the validation of some outside organization in order to say whether or not what I'm saying is truly there or not, or is valid or not. Let us not wait on processes that might be ceremonial in order to avoid actually facing truths that are really staring us in the face in these issues.
Yes, yes. And I feel like it's, to lay out an honest picture, I would be remiss if I were not to acknowledge that I too experienced through observation and firsthand some things that, were discriminatory. And at the same token, I will also say that of all the different places that I worked, the people there and that diversity was unlike anywhere else I've ever worked. You know what I mean? Like
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
it's an interesting. So I want to, in full disclosure and honesty of speaking with my experience with the organization as well, to give light to the diversity that I experienced from the families that we serve. Not to say that there weren't biases, because there were that I experienced, and also like the diversity of them employing people who had Down syndrome through, like I have
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
worked in other organizations that had that level of diversity as far as ableism. You know what I mean? And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
I want to totally honor your experience, which is big enough to honor at least that aspect of my experience as well, and to say that I did feel discriminated against for sexism. Like, I'm just going to lay it all out on the table, and people will take from it what they will. But I felt like it was important for me to say that part as well, since we both were employed at that same organization. And to your point, like I am also familiar with stories that you said as well, of people not being treated fairly, whether it was a patient and or staff worker. So it's all of it, right?
It's all of it. Yeah. This a reckoning, reveals that there are very few pure heroes and very few pure villains, right? It's all mixed and complicated. But that complication should not make us fear taking things on and addressing them. It can be true. All of that could be true. There could be a stronger awareness and a willingness to hire disabled folks. And it could be true that I looked around me and I didn't see another Black male in any form of leadership in any way, shape, or form around me or in the past 20 years anywhere in that institution. Maybe one. And that one, I will say with mixed respect, just kept his head down. And so, those are true too. I know that the proportion of people who leave, who decide not to work at Seattle Children's Hospital, are disproportionately people of color compared to the staffing. I mean, all of these things are true. And like there is a desire to celebrate diversity. There is a Center for Diversity and Health Equity, which I don't think any other children's hospital has. There's many ways to look at this that have many different components to them, and they don't negate each other, but they do make the picture much more complex.
Indeed. So I'm going to give you this charge as we wrap it up, because I was going to call this conversation The Courage to Quit. And I am clear and on board with your position about the whole resilience, the courage thing, and how we started this conversation. And so as we wrap up today, if it's not the courage to quit, what would you say that's catchy that would be the proper moniker or cornerstone for this conversation that we just had today? What would this episode be called?
Oh man, I'm not going to come up with anything that sounds clever.
Don't sell yourself short.
But maybe the responsibility to reflect.
All right. Well, you've heard it here. My name is Malika Lee, the host of Feel Good, the podcast. My wonderful guest who has very generously and authentically shared his experience, Dr. Ben Danielson. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your insights and experience.
Thanks for putting up with all my talking and ranting. I would say your responses today were much more valuable than any of mine. So I appreciated hearing you and just having this conversation with you. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for your commitment to humanity, acting humanely.
Yes.
And thank you all for listening. Until the next time, please share, like, subscribe, share it with your friends. And we'd love to hear from you. If there's anything that we discussed today that struck a chord, that you have questions about or insights and would like to contribute to the conversation, we welcome that. Until the next time, be good to yourself and each other. Bye for now.